Recently, I was asked a question on what are the best episodes to watch from each Doctor from Doctor Who. It is a very daunting thing indeed because the programme has been going for nearly 60 years and over 850 episodes have been produced. So naturally, you're going to have to ask, where do I start? Do I start right from the beginning and work my way through? It's possible you could do that. Or do you pick and choose different eras? So for this video, I'm going to let all of the newcomers know what is the best place for you to start your journey as a Whovian. This is Doctor Who for newcomers. Starting off with the first Doctor era, there's only one place to start. It's An Unearthly Child, such a great piece of television. In this story, we essentially learn certain things about what this show is all about. We get to see the Doctor for the first time. We get to meet his companions. We get to see his granddaughter. And we learn about this police telephone box, which is actually a spaceship in disguise, and this spaceship is bigger on the inside and it can travel through time and space. Really brilliant stuff, a great introduction to the show. The first episode is just absolutely stellar. That is the reason to watch this story alone. The next 3 episodes are really good. We end up going back to the Stone Ages. Admittedly, they're not as good as the first episode. The first episode is the highlight out of this entire serial. But apart from that, On an Earthly Child is a great way to start. And if you really enjoy these first 4 episodes of the show, then I highly recommend checking out the following 2 stories, The Daleks and The Edge of Destruction. The Edge of Destruction is a great character piece. We learn more about our 4 main characters, the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, Susan. It's all there, and it's set all entirely in the TARDIS. The Daleks is really interesting because it's the first ever time that we have met the Daleks. I'm pretty sure that people who have never seen Doctor Who will be aware at least of who the Daleks are, the most fearsome enemy that the Doctor has ever faced. They're the most iconic enemy that the Doctor has ever faced throughout the show's history. They've turned up numerous times, and it turns out that they turned up for the first ever time in the show's second ever serial, and this story essentially was the reason why Doctor Who continued throughout the 1960s and why it is still on today. So I highly recommend that you check those 2 stories out as well, but essential viewing for the first Doctor era is definitely An Unearthly Child. One thing to bear in mind though with the first Doctor era, and indeed a lot of the classic era, is these stories are serialized, so a lot of them are going to be like 4 parts long, 6 parts long, etc. Some of them are quite long, so just bear in mind if you're wanting to do a marathon right from the very beginning, there may be some stories which you may want to avoid. You don't want to watch an overly long story and get very bored, so what I would recommend from the outset is not necessarily to do a marathon straight away if you're brand new to the show, but what I'd rather do, if this was me, I would just pick and choose. But I think those 3 stories are a great starting off point if you're wanting to get straight into the show from the very beginning. After that, I'd pick and choose certain stories. Moving on to the second Doctor era now. This is a little bit more difficult because his first ever story was The Power of the Daleks. The daunting factor about that though is it is 6 episodes long, so to some viewers it may be a little bit off-putting. To me, having watched many Dalek stories, this is without doubt one of my favourite stories of all time. And I'd say that it is highly recommended that you do indeed watch this story. However, I wouldn't say that this is the first story that you should watch for the Second Doctor era, because the best form to watch it right now, it's all animated, because unfortunately this story, along with many others from the 1960s, are lost. So what I would recommend starting with is the Tomb of the Cybermen. Here we see the Cybermen making their third appearance in the show. They did appear a couple of times before this, but the Tomb of the Cybermen is a nice four-parter, a nice little adventure, and it's filled with many iconic moments. We get the best of Patrick Troughton as the Second Doctor. We see Jamie and Victoria, who are his companions in this story. We get some interesting villains, one-time villains in this story. But for the most part, the Cybermen are the best thing about this, so I would absolutely recommend The Tomb of the Cybermen being the first Second Doctor story that you watch. If you enjoy that and you're looking for more Second Doctor goodness, why not check out stories like The Macra Terror, which is also animated, because unfortunately that story is lost. There's also The Mind Robber, which I personally love. There's also The Invasion, which also features the Cybermen. That is 8 parts long though, so bear that in mind. First off, watch The Tomb of the Cybermen, because that is just superb. Going from the Third Doctor era, there's quite a number of places where to start. Naturally, I would start with Spearhead from Space, which was his first ever story. Spearhead from Space has often been cited by many Doctor Who fans as being a great place to start off if you're quite new to the show. It's got a lot of action. You've got some good villains in the form of Autons, who are these plastic shop window dummies. We see John Pertwee for the first time as a Third Doctor, and we see a couple of other characters for the first time, namely Liz Shaw. We see Unit. For me, at least, I thought that this era was one of the best eras in the show, and no pun intended, but Spearhead from Space, it spearheaded all of this into motion. So I highly recommend you watch that. And I'd also recommend watching the following story, Doctor Who and the Silurians, because it's a similar sort of story. It's sort of an invasion story, but with a little twist. I won't spoil it for you, because if you're brand new to the show, I want people to experience all of the thrills and spills of the show completely blind. I don't want to spoil certain plot elements, but what I will say is it is a great story to follow on from Spearhead from Space. The downside of it is, though, it's 7 episodes long, so again, it is quite a big ask to watch. But if you really want to get into it, you don't necessarily have to watch the whole thing in one go. Other stories which I think really complement Spearhead from Space are Terror of the Autons. There we meet one of the other most iconic enemies throughout the show's history, the Master, for the first time. And this story introduced Roger Delgado into the role, and he was the most iconic version of the Master in my eyes. There's other stories from this era, such as The Three Doctors and The Time Warrior. I've just picked those two out in particular because those two are ones which I enjoy immensely. There are other really great stories in there, but some of them do require prerequisites, so I highly recommend starting with all of those that I've just mentioned, because essentially I don't want someone to start off with a story like, say, The Sea Devils, because while I think that story is just phenomenal, it does have a few elements in there which are thrown in, and to newcomers they'll be like, what the hell is going on here? Because they may need to watch a couple of stories which took place before this to fully understand what is going on there. Now into the Fourth Doctor era. This, in my eyes, is a really, really good place to start if you're wanting to start off being a Doctor Who fan and you're one of those who actually wants to start off with the classic series. So we have Robot, which is just a great debut story for Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor. It's sort of a take on King Kong, except we have a giant robot instead of a giant ape. We have the following story, The Ark in Space, which I think is also very, very good. We have the Sontaran Experiment, and if you're one of those who watched the Third Doctor before this, which you can do so, then this heavily complements the Time Warrior. And then we also have Genesis of the Daleks. Now, Genesis of the Daleks, I would actually say, is the perfect jumping point for the classic series of Doctor Who. It was my personal jumping on point. It is one of the most iconic Doctor Who stories of all time. It's got Daleks in it. It's the first ever time that Davros appeared. We've got the most iconic Doctor in there. We've got the most iconic companion in there. It's just really, really good. Another great way to start off would be with Pyramids of Mars. It's just excellent. Other highlights include The Brain of Morbius, The Seas of Doom, and The Robots of Death. Those are my personal favourites. There are plenty more in there, but again, I don't want to overcomplicate things for newcomers. With the Fifth Doctor era, I'd actually start off with a story like Earthshock. This story has Cybermen in it, and in my eyes, it is a good starting off point for Peter Davison. This era might not be the best place to start off, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, Peter Davison is an absolutely fantastic Doctor. The Fifth Doctor era has got some great adventures in there, but personally, I think if you're starting off, you want to start off before this or with the new series, because this era is filled to the brim with a lot of continuity, and the same thing goes with the Sixth Doctor and the Seventh Doctor era, as we'll get to that. The other story which I want to mention as well, which is kind of surprising to some viewers who are familiar with it, is The Caves of Androzani. This story is actually the final story to feature the Fifth Doctor before he changes his appearance. This is the essential regeneration story. For those of you who are unfamiliar with regeneration, regeneration is when a Doctor dies and another Doctor takes their place, and what it means in real life terms is basically the actor playing the Doctor has left the role and a new actor takes on the role. They change their personality as well as their appearance, and that is one of the key factors as to why the show has continued, along with so many of the great stories that have been told throughout the nearly 60-year history of the show. This is just great viewing for me because as a story it just stands on its own 2 feet. You don't necessarily have to watch other Fifth Doctor stories to understand this. I would say you might get a bit more fulfillment though if you did watch other Fifth Doctor stories before it. I think that this story is stellar, and if you did start off watching the Fifth Doctor with his final story, then that's fine, because honestly, The Caves of Androzani is definitely one for newcomers to enjoy, because The Caves of Androzani, like Genesis of the Daleks, is highly regarded by a lot of Doctor Who fans. Going into the Sixth Doctor era, this is a very complicated one, because I think there's only one story that newcomers will watch, and you can decide whether you want to watch more Sixth Doctor after that, and it is Vengeance on Varos. It's like reality TV, but done in the 1980s, with a little bit of a Doctor Who spin of it. That's all I can say to really explain the story. It is a little bit controversial. This era overall is a little bit controversial. Out of his time on TV, Vengeance on Varos is personally my favourite Sixth Doctor story, so that is why I think if you're wanting to get into the Sixth Doctor, then Vengeance on Varos is the perfect way to start. The Seventh Doctor era is also a little bit tricky. The story I've chosen for newcomers to start off with is The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, because, again, a little bit like Vengeance on Varos with the Sixth Doctor, you don't need to watch any other stories before this to understand what's going on. There's other great stories from the Seventh Doctor, Sylvester McCoy era, but there's a lot of continuity laden throughout it. So, to newcomers, they may not understand what the hell is going on unless they had a lot of knowledge about Doctor Who as a TV show. This one takes place in a circus, and I think that the atmosphere in this is pretty well executed. With the Eighth Doctor, there's really, really not much selection in terms of where you want to start, because he was only in the TV movie and he had a minisode. So I guess all of that is all up to you. Personally, I would not start off at all with the TV movie. I would wait a while before even thinking about watching it. It's not a story which I say never watch it ever, because personally I don't think it's one that should be hated. Some people hate the TV movie for various reasons, which is kind of understandable, I do get that, but I don't think it's that bad myself, although it's not great either. But still, it's worth watching, but definitely not a great starting off point in my eyes. The minisode that he did, The Night of the Doctor, it's the same sort of category. It is absolutely excellent, but I would definitely steer clear of that and watch a few other stories, particularly from the modern era, to fully appreciate it for what it is. Now into the modern era, starting with the Ninth Doctor era, I've chosen 3 stories from this era to start off with. The natural starting off point for a lot of Doctor Who fans will be the first episode, Rose. It's another perfect way to start off Doctor Who without any knowledge whatsoever, because that is exactly how I started, and from this episode onwards I have watched the show religiously, and I've gone back to watch the classic series. It's all down to this story right here. Just absolutely brilliant. But if for some reason you don't want to start off with the very first episode of the revival era, then why not start off with a Dalek story? Dalek. This story essentially rebooted the Daleks for the 21st century. Absolutely stellar television. Another highlight from this era is The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. In my eyes, the modern era is a little bit easier to access than the classic series due to the episode format. The episodes are no longer serialized like in the classic series, so you no longer have your 4-parters or your 6-parters or anything like that. You get your occasional 2-parter and your 3-parter now and again in the new series, but it's not all the time. The majority of the new series, you just have standalone adventures which last typically for 45 to 50 minutes, and then that's it, you're on to the next one. So the Ninth Doctor era, again, I will say, it is a really great way to start off your journey as a Doctor Who fan. Going into the 10th Doctor era, look, if you really don't want to start off with the Ninth Doctor for some reason, then it's okay. I think that the Ninth Doctor era is the perfect way to start off if you're just looking to start off with the new series and then go back to the classic series later on. I suppose if you want to skip 9, then you can also start off with the Christmas Invasion, which was the 10th Doctor's first story. The 10th Doctor era is almost flawless in my opinion, and I can tell you that you should watch this story, you should watch that story. But similarly to the Tom Baker era, there are possibly a few stories in there which may alienate newer fans. So I'm just going to pick out a few highlights on where are great places you can start. So we have The Impossible Planet, The Satan Pit, we have Smith and Jones, Voyage of the Damned, Partners in Crime, and Silence in a Library, and The Forest of the Dead. Now going into the 11th Doctor era, another great way to start is with his first episode, The 11th Hour. Similarly to Spearhead from Space, I think this is a great jumping on point. If you're one of those who wants to skip the 9th and 10th Doctor's era and want to go straight to the 11th for whatever reason, then The 11th Hour is a great story to start off with. Other highlights from the 11th Doctor's era are Amy's Choice, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon, which is a great 2-part adventure. We have The Bells of St. John thrown in there because it's a little bit of fun. Now with the 12th Doctor era, there's a few episodes which I've chosen, but I don't think that this era is accessible to newcomers to the show. I definitely think that it's not the best place to start. There's not really a story from the Peter Capaldi era which I would say, yeah, definitely start off with this story. If you watch this story, then you should definitely become a Doctor Who fan. I don't know if that's just down to opinion or anything, because someone else may disagree with me, but personally, I just think it's less accessible. Nevertheless, though, there are some great stories in there which I do really enjoy. Stories such as Mummy on the Orient Express, Flatline, the 2-parter Under the Lake and Before the Flood, just to name a few. Now going into the current era of Doctor Who, if you have no interest whatsoever in previous incarnations of the Doctor, and all you're bothered about is the current, then this is a place to start. It's not my personal place where I would start, but if you're one of those who just want to start off with the current Doctor, then you can do so if you want to. So, The Woman Who Fell to Earth is Jodie Whittaker's first story. That introduces her to all of the audience. You get the idea by now. You get introduced to her companions, and you get introduced to one of the main villains from her first series, the Stenza. Other highlights, which are my personal favourites in my eyes, are stories like Rosa, which is really powerful television. We've got Demons of the Punjab. We've got Kablam, Resolution, which features Daleks yet again, and finally, The Haunting of Villa Diodati, which features a Cyberman. And those are, in my opinion, the best places to start off in a way with each Doctor if you are looking to become a Doctor Who fan. Hopefully this video has helped you out in some way if you're looking to become a Doctor Who fan. If it did, then please like the video and comment below, as I would love to hear what you would have chosen for your first ever Doctor Who experience. I would really, really love to hear what it is. If you're new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe and hit that bell button for notifications every time I upload a new Doctor Who video. Also, feel free to follow me on my Twitter. On there, I post Doctor Who content almost daily. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care, and I shall see you next time.